morning sun rose slowly over the military cemetery, casting long shadows between rows of white stones. Dew clung to the grass, sparkling like tears that refused to dry. By the iron gate stood an old man, his back slightly bent, his hands wrapped around a worn broom. His uniform wasn't military, just a faded jacket, patched at the elbows with no insignias or medals. To anyone passing by, he was the caretaker. Nothing more. Every morning he swept the entrance. He removed dried leaves, polished the bronze plaques, and picked stray flowers that had withered overnight. To most visitors, he was invisible, a quiet figure blending into the silence of the graves, but his eyes, pale, sharp, heavy with memory, told another story. A group of young cadets walked past, their chatter breaking the stillness. One pointed at the old man. "Look at him, sweeping graves like it's the most important job in the world." Another snickered. "Bet he never even served, just another civilian making himself useful." They laughed, the sound echoing between the headstones. The old man didn't react. He kept sweeping, but his grip tightened on the broom, his knuckles white. Behind him, a widow kneeling at a grave noticed. She frowned at the cadets, whispering, "You don't laugh in a place like this, not when you don't know who you're laughing at." The cadets shrugged it off. To them, he was nobody. Later that afternoon, the cemetery grew quieter. Families had left. The wind carried only the sound of flags flapping gently in the distance. The old man walked among the stones. He paused at certain graves, not to clean, but to stand, to stare, to whisper something under his breath. At one stone, he brushed off the dirt carefully, almost tenderly. The inscription read, "Lieutenant Arlen Miles, Shadow Company." His lips moved in silence. His fingers traced the carved letters with the tenderness of a brother. Then he walked on. Nearby, Captain Rains, the cemetery supervisor, watched from his office window. Something about the way the old man moved troubled him. He didn't walk like a janitor. He walked like a soldier. Every step measured, deliberate, disciplined. That night, as the old man sat in his small quarters by the edge of the cemetery, he opened a drawer. Inside was a single photograph, faded, edges torn. The photo showed a younger version of himself, standing with 6 men in full combat gear, faces smeared with dirt, eyes filled with exhaustion and fire. He stared at the picture for a long time, then closed his eyes. And the memory took him back. The desert, the endless heat, the rattle of machine guns, the sandstorm howled across the valley as his unit crawled through the ruins of a bombed-out village. Civilians screamed in the distance, smoke rising from collapsed buildings. They weren't supposed to be there. Their mission had been observe and report. But when the ambush came, orders meant nothing. Survival was all that mattered. He remembered running into a collapsing house, pulling 2 children from beneath the rubble. He remembered his rifle emptying round after round as enemies swarmed. And he remembered the moment that still haunted him when his closest brother-in-arms was shot beside him, blood soaking the sand. "I'll cover you, Eli," his friend shouted. But Elias, yes, that was his name, had refused. He dragged his friend out, taking the bullet meant for himself in the process. That scar was still on his shoulder. He touched it absent-mindedly as he swept graves decades later. The next day, more recruits passed the gates. One of them, bolder than the rest, smirked as he tossed a soda can on the ground. "Hey, old man, pick that up, would you?" Elias stared at the can for a moment, then at the recruit. His pale blue eyes pierced like steel. The boy swallowed, suddenly uneasy, but didn't move. Before Elias could respond, Captain Rains appeared. He bent down, picked up the can himself, and snapped at the recruit. "Show some respect. This man's been here longer than you've been alive." The recruit rolled his eyes and walked off. But Rains didn't move. He turned to Elias. "You're not just a caretaker, are you?" Elias said nothing. He returned to sweeping, but his silence was answer enough. Word began to spread among the base staff. Some whispered that the old man had once been decorated. Others said he was a deserter. No one knew for sure. But one thing was undeniable. He never missed a day. Rain, snow, blazing sun. He was always there at dawn, sweeping, polishing, standing guard over the forgotten. One afternoon, a high-ranking general came to the cemetery for a memorial service. As he walked through the gates, his eyes landed on Elias. He froze. His face paled. "Is that him?" the general whispered to his aide. The aide frowned. "Who, sir?" But the general didn't answer. He simply lowered his gaze in quiet respect, something his aide had never seen before. The cadets who once mocked Elias were on duty during a funeral the following week. As the service ended, the general approached the flagpole. He gave a single command, his voice heavy with authority. "Lower the flags." Every soldier turned, confused. "Sir, there's no scheduled national mourning today." The general's eyes didn't leave Elias, who stood silently by the gates, broom in hand. "Lower them," he repeated, and one by one the flags began to descend. The cadets stared in disbelief. The widow from earlier smiled faintly. The air grew thick with silence, and for the first time, Elias, the man they thought was just a caretaker, lifted his eyes, revealing tears that had been buried for decades. As the flag slowly descended, the sound of metal clasps rattling against poles echoed through the cemetery. Families paused, soldiers froze, and the cadets who had once laughed now stood stiff with confusion. The general removed his cap. His voice, low but firm, carried across the rows of gravestones. "You stand in the presence of a man who carried this nation's burden long after others would have fallen. You stand in the presence of Elias Ward." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The cadets glanced at each other, uncertain. The name meant nothing to them, but to the veterans present, it was thunder. A legend whispered in barracks, spoken of in hushed tones during sleepless nights. The forgotten guardian had a name again. The scene shifted into Elias's memory, drawing the audience into the defining night of his life. The jungle was thick, wet, alive with insects and shadows. His unit, Shadow Company, had been sent to extract hostages from a fortified prison camp. The mission was simple on paper, in and out before dawn. But nothing went as planned. Gunfire erupted. The night lit up with tracers and explosions. Soldiers fell around him, cries swallowed by the roar of combat. Elias, then a captain, took command when his superior was killed. He led his men through fire and mud, breaching walls, breaking chains, dragging prisoners to safety. His body burned with shrapnel wounds. His ears rang from the blast of grenades, but he never stopped moving. And then the moment came. The final prisoner transport was blocked. Enemy reinforcements closed in. Elias turned to his men. "Get them out," he ordered. "But sir, that's an order." He stayed behind, holding the line alone, his rifle spitting until the barrel glowed. When the last bullet was spent, he fought with his fists, his knife, sheer will. Reinforcements finally arrived, but by then Elias was gone, swallowed by smoke and silence. The records marked him missing, presumed dead. Back in the present, Elias's eyes shimmered with the memory. He spoke for the first time in front of the stunned cadets. "They thought I died that night, and maybe part of me did. The men I couldn't save, they never left me." His voice cracked, raw with grief. "So I chose silence. No medals, no parades, just this place, these graves. Because the ones who never came back deserve more honor than I ever did." The general bowed his head. "You carried their memory alone all these years." Elias shook his head. "I didn't carry it alone. They carried me. Every dawn, every night, every stone I clean. It's for them." Scene 12. The cadet's transformation. The young soldiers who once mocked him now stood rigid, tears burning their eyes. One stepped forward, barely 20, voice trembling. "Sir, We didn't know. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder, firm but gentle. Respect doesn't come from knowing, it comes from choosing. Remember that. The cadet swallowed hard, then saluted. One by one, the others followed, until an entire line of cadets stood at attention before the man they had once laughed at. The general gave a final command. Hold the flags. The flags, lowered halfway, rippled in the wind, frozen in mourning. For whom? Not just for Elias, but for every brother he had lost, every soldier who never made it home. Elias stood at the gates, broom still in hand, tears running silently down his weathered face. For decades he had carried his burden alone, but now, for the first time, it was shared. As dusk fell, the cemetery was bathed in golden light. The crowd dispersed slowly, speaking in hushed tones. But something had changed. Elias didn't need applause or recognition or titles. All he needed was silence. And silence was exactly what he received. The silence of respect, of remembrance, of a story finally told. The camera lingered on him, sweeping once more, the broom scraping softly across the stone path. Only now, every sweep carried a different weight, not of shame, but of honor. Some heroes don't rest in books or medals or parades. Some heroes live quietly among us, carrying burdens we'll never understand, and when the time comes, even the flags bow to their silence. Fade to black.